Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy that folks are joining us for this wonderful book launch of Mary Shepherd Wong's edited volume, Teaching for Peace and Social Justice in Myanmar and Identity, Agency, and Critical Pedagogy. So we're really, really happy to be here and just kind of get together this wonderful panel. And so Monisha Bajaj and myself are here just to talk a little bit about our larger book series in Peace and Human Rights Education. That is with Bloomsbury, which is now in its, I guess, third year. So really, it's been around 2 years. And just to talk a little bit about how this came about. I mean, I think this was, Monish and I had many conversations over the years, last 2 decades really, about peace education, human rights education, sort of gaps in the fields, how they're related. We talked a bit about, this is just many conversations about both the local and global nature of the fields, looking at critical, transformative, decolonial forms, etc. So this sort of launched both things, an introductory book that we published in 2021, as well as this book series. So those were kind of related. So in our book, I'll just talk briefly, which is Peace and Human Rights in Education, an Introduction. We really wanted to highlight the distinct evolutions of each field, but then also underscore how these fields converge and work in tandem with each other as well in terms of related scholarship and practice. So the book sort of laid out our visions for the fields and their intersections, but it also really launched this innovative series with Bloomsbury. And what we were thinking was that we could really highlight groundbreaking scholarship on empirical research, studies, monographs in either field, or even if they're intersecting. But we really, really kind of wanted to lay the groundwork, the framework for that. So our series then, which is, I mentioned, related in some ways to the book that we launched, but that kind of catapulted the series, was exactly that, to highlight the groundbreaking research and conceptual frameworks on human rights education, on peace education, and both. Across the globe, we wanted to kind of launch a series that would analyze the limits and possibilities in both local and global dimensions and contexts of these fields. We wanted to also highlight the historical contexts that have shaped the directions of these fields. We wanted to amplify marginalized voices and scholarship in these fields, and really wanted to be serve as a nexus for key debates, questions, and other issues in the field. So we did that. We kind of brought together a really robust, wonderful advisory board from across the globe, and we launched the series. And so we mentioned our book sort of launched that. Our second book is Mary's book, which we're really excited about. We're going to hear more about that. And we do have a third book in the works that we're editing called Decolonial Underground Pedagogy, Unschooling and Subcultural Learning for Peace and Human Rights. And that's by Noah Romero. So that's in the works right now, and we're open to more. So I'm going to kick it over to Monisha, who's going to talk a little bit about introducing this wonderful edited volume.
So when we launched this series and Mary Shepherd Wong approached us about this idea for an edited volume that brought together scholars from Myanmar, activists from Myanmar, and global scholars who work on issues, it really was just a perfect fit for our vision for this series, and a great book that kind of launches the vision that we had for what this series will do. We'll bring together voices, really emphasize these intersections of human rights and peace, look at conflict in new and kind of groundbreaking ways. And just if you look at the chapters of this book, which we'll hear about more, there are just so many exciting methodological dimensions, grandmother's wisdom, scholarship from the ground, activists, just those global connections that we were trying to do. So we're thrilled that this book is out in the world, Teaching for Peace and Social Justice in Myanmar, Identity, Agency, and Critical Pedagogy. And we're so lucky that Mary Shepherd Wong will now tell us more about this book. Mary Shepherd Wong is a professor and director at Azusa Pacific University, and two contributing authors from the book, Irina Iwasaki, lecturer who specializes in languages, schools, and communities in the International and Comparative Education program at Teachers College, Columbia University, and Rosalie Metro, who is an assistant teaching professor at the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Missouri, Columbia. We'll pass it over to you, and we're so excited to be part of this book launch and for this book to be out there.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I think I'd like to share my screen if I could. So I'm going to, let me make sure that you can see this. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Do you see the book? Yeah. Okay, good. I see a thumbs up. All right, great. Yeah, this is just a cover of the book and the title. It's obviously Teaching for Peace and Social Justice in Myanmar, Identity, Agency, and Critical Pedagogy. All right, and I have a copy here of the table of contents that you can see, I hope. I just put the link up there at the top so you can see that, a link to the book at Bloomsbury where you could order it. Just let me quickly, I'm gonna put on my timer here, quickly go over the table of contents just to give you an idea of what's all included. We have a wonderful foreword by Ardith Wong. She is the chair of political science at University of Massachusetts Lowell. She's also the director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, I believe it's called. And she's a native of Myanmar. I got to meet her there when she was on her Fulbright years before this project began. She just really sets this off a wonderful tone. She understands Myanmar so well. And then it launches into my chapter, What's at Stake. And in my chapter, I basically outline these different chapters. I also like to, each chapter we asked the authors to actually tell us a bit about themselves and their story of how they got engaged in the work and became an activist or became interested in pedagogy that teaches for peace and social justice. So I do that in my chapter as an example as well. In looking at part 1, agency, there's 3 chapters. 2 of the chapters are written, 2 and 3 are written by 2 colleagues. They both have done a lot of work in Myanmar. Gang Zan is actually a local in Myanmar and still there. And then Joanne Ladderjung has done a lot of work with him on training and peace building and workshops there. They have 2 wonderful chapters, but launching it in chapter 1, right, Kwat Thuzar and Zoe Matthews. Again, we have someone local in Myanmar and then someone who's done a lot of work on peace building and social justice seminars. They get together and they show their research that they did in showing how English language teachers actually became teachers of peace and social justice, and their journey is very interesting. As we move on to part 2 in identity, we have 3 chapters here. I'm not going to talk too much about chapter 5 because that's good. I'm going to leave that up to Irene, but just let me touch on chapter 4. I love this chapter because it gives us some context for the Rakhine State. Mel Walker, who has just been there for, I think, a decade or more, and her 2 students who went through the academy that they set up there, just discussed the wonderful work they did and the transformation it had on the students and their lives. Then in chapter 6, we have Akar Puthat, and she's working with Grace and Katie, and they talk about quite openly and honestly about some of the difficulties of when you have Western researchers collaborating with local people trying to develop materials. Very interesting chapter. Then we can move to part 3. It's on critical pedagogy, the focus there. I'm not going to talk too much about chapter 8, putting down our weapons. When we talk about history, that wonderful chapter is going to be discussed by Rose. And then just let me talk briefly about 7 and 9. So in chapter 7, Radka brings her 2 students together, Noah Sa Blut and Kinsa San Yi, and they examine middle school curriculum, and they see how it's really kind of impeding peace and rather than supporting it. A very good chapter. And then finally, we end with Tony Waters' chapter. He actually worked at PIAP in a PhD program in peace studies. He had about a dozen students from Myanmar, and he discusses their dissertations and their publications and that journey and the difficulties of finding actually funding from agencies and who gets to write the questions. And then we have a wonderful afterword by Ashley South, who is a very well-known scholar in this field. So that's about all my time. So I'm gonna turn it over to Irene now, and I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone, for this warm introduction. First of all, I want to just commend that we were able to get this book across, especially that we're commemorating 2 years of the coup d'etat. February 1st, 2020, 2021 was when this coup started and completely reversed the trajectory of things that were going positively. And it tells you how much societies can change in a flip of just like this. So in how much it was really challenging, and also how much we had to, I think a lot of us had to rework our chapters because of that, to bring that context back and what can be said and what cannot be said in protections of our participants or the people that we know back there. So, but it's been an honor to be part of this book. I co-authored this chapter 5, Reframing Policy and Practice, rethinking language as resources in multilingual education in Myanmar. I co-authored this chapter with my colleague and friend, Jasmine Tintut-Williams. We sort of, the chapter starts with sort of how we met and why we got involved with Myanmar. Myself, I am Japanese, but I've been living in Myanmar I grew up in Myanmar since 1995. And it's a place I consider home. It's a place that I have long ties and relationships and friendships. And also the reason why I chose to go into the field of research and international and comparative education, sort of dealing with this. Jasmine Tintut-Williams, her background is written. She wrote it very well, but she's she's a Burmese American with also ties, family ties there. And we began working together in 2018. We've worked together in sort of a private international school that my parents had set up back in 1995. It's not an international school in the sense that we know the tuition fees are not exorbitant, and it's meant to be a space where students it was mainly to deal with returnee students who were coming back from the US, Japan, the UK when the country kind of opened up. So we do a lot of multilingual things and language-related activities in that school. And then at the same time, Jasmine and I started working with other ethno-linguistic communities. Our specialty is multilingual education, mother tongue-based multilingual education. And given the situation, because we wanted to protect also a lot of the people there and so on, we sort of approached this chapter as a sort of an ethnography in a sense, in a sense that we sort of wanted to reflect on, our role there, being sort of insider, outsider in a space. And also just hearing a lot at that time, there was a lot of discussions in the international realm with consultants or agencies, development, and also at the national level and community level about this mother tongue-based multilingual education and how terminology was challenging. Some wanted to call it mother tongue-based, others wanted to call it ethnic language, just multilingual education. All of this and sort of like who gets to decide what we do was sort of the self-reflection, and how a lot of this is at the intersection of language is so much at the intersection of society, power, identity, culture, and peace in Myanmar. So I hope you enjoy the chapter, and I look forward to discussing further. Thank you.
Thanks for that. That was really interesting. And I'm so glad to be part of this book. It's a really unique book, and it's a unique series. So my chapter I wrote with my colleague, Saya Angkain, or teacher Angkain. And I met him around 2009 on the Thai-Burma border when I was doing my dissertation research. And at that time, I was looking into ways of teaching the histories of Burma or Myanmar in ways that could help resolve or reconcile the ethnic and religious conflict that had been going on there for so many years. And that was a topic that I had gotten interested in about 20 years ago when I first went to the Thai-Burma border. I'm a history teacher back in the US, and we have similar issues in our classrooms here, right? With kids coming from different backgrounds, very different worldviews of history, and who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed, and what it means to be patriotic and what it means to be a citizen. And I was really interested to see how that works in the Myanmar context. And when I first started asking people about the different versions of Myanmar history, one proverb that I heard a lot was "Dotan bi yazawingu pyone," which means pick up your club and then speak about history. Like, don't go into a discussion of history unarmed. And it was kind of acknowledging this situation where people felt very concerned to talk about history because it was such a sensitive topic. And I then later worked with another teacher, CIES Sailun Kam, who's on the Thai-Burma border as well. And he said, we need to change that proverb to let's put down our weapons when we talk about history. And that idea was really powerful to me. And it doesn't refer to using nonviolent methods or not using armed struggle outside of the classroom. That's not the point we're trying to make, but rather going into discussions of history in ways where people can actually learn from each other and transform their understandings. So I had written a textbook about the history of Myanmar in the early 2000s, and Wong, the teacher I mentioned, had been using this textbook. He was teaching also on the Thai-Burma border, and I got together with him initially to get feedback about that textbook, and I'll always be grateful because he was like, it's not really that good. I think we could do something better. And so we decided to collect primary source documents from Myanmar's history, from hundreds of years of history, bring them into a source book, and then create themed units and activities where students could actually analyze the documents for themselves instead of being told what they mean. So Wong and I were really excited about introducing teachers and students to these documents themselves, which have been hard to find inside Myanmar and were not easily collected. So the chapter covers basically activities that he did in his high school classroom on the Thai-Burma border, and also activities that we did in teacher training workshops. And he also shares about his experience. He's an amazing person. He's a former political prisoner, has a degree in economics, but also really has a passion for history. And he's one of the most creative and dynamic history teachers I've ever seen. So in these workshops, we guided teachers to examine these documents and do some applied theater workshops. So the idea comes from Augusto Boal, the Brazilian educator and theater activist, that if people return to moments of past oppression and sort of reenact them and work through them again, they can actually transform those experiences. So fascinating stuff. If you're interested to learn more, please read our chapter, and thanks so much.
Well, that concludes our session. We really hope we get to see some of you at the conference. 4 of us will be there. Rose can't make it, but for those of you online, we hope you enjoy just this little introduction of our book, Teaching for Peace and Social Justice in Myanmar. Okay, all right. Bye. Thank you, everybody.